1987.
I used to watch Buck Rogers in the 25th century as a kid back in the late 70s and early 80s, and honestly, I had absolutely no idea what was going on. None. But it had spaceships, laser battles, aliens, robots, and a guy called Twiki running around yelling biddy biddy biddy, so naturally I loved it. But here's the truly incredible part. Decades later, Hollywood actually tried to reboot Buck Rogers with George Clooney involved. Massive studios, huge money, prestige writers, and then corporate lawyers absolutely vaporized the project before a single episode got made. This is one of the weirdest sci-fi franchise stories ever, and honestly, it perfectly fits watching nonsense unfold. If you grew up around that late 70s, early 80s era, you probably stumbled across Buck Rogers at some point. And if you were a kid, you probably watched it the exact same way I did. You weren't analysing plot logic, you weren't questioning the writing, you weren't sitting there asking, wait, why does the future look like a disco nightclub? No, you saw lasers and spaceships and thought, excellent, I'm in. And honestly, television back then had this strange charm to it. Everything felt experimental. Studios had seen the success of Star Wars and immediately panicked. Suddenly everybody wanted space operas, laser guns, chrome corridors, shiny jumpsuits, evil empires, heroic pilots, and Buck Rogers arrived right in the middle of all that madness. The setup itself is wonderfully ridiculous. Buck Rogers is a NASA astronaut from 1987. His ship malfunctions. He gets frozen in space for over 500 years. Then he wakes up in the 25th century. Simple, classic pulp sci-fi. And honestly, it's a genuinely solid setup because Buck becomes the audience viewpoint character. He doesn't understand this world, so we learn alongside him. Now visually, this show is peak late 70s science fiction. Everything looks glossy, metallic, theatrical, colourful, wildly over-designed. Sometimes it looks futuristic, sometimes it looks like a nightclub in Las Vegas, sometimes both simultaneously, and I say this with lots of affection. Looking back now as an adult, this show is absolutely hilarious in places. You had space vampires, weird alien politics, disco-inspired costumes, robots carrying talking computer discs, laser dogfights, melodrama everywhere, and somehow it all worked together. Mostly because the show completely embraced what it was. It never felt embarrassed. That's important. Modern franchises constantly feel afraid of sincerity. Everything has to become self-aware, sarcastic, meta, quippy. But Buck Rogers, no. This thing commits fully to the nonsense, and honestly, I respect that. Because even when the writing gets silly, the show has personality, something modern streaming sci-fi often completely lacks. And then of course you had Twiki, possibly one of the most wonderfully bizarre robot sidekicks ever created. Twiki was basically part comic relief, part robot assistant, part chaos gremlin, and every time he appeared, you remembered him. That matters. Memorable side characters matter, especially in science fiction. The problem with a lot of modern streaming content is that characters blur together, but people still remember Twiki, Wilma Deering, Princess Adala, Hawk. Why? Because they actually had identities, even when the material got campy. Now here's where the real nonsense starts. Season 1 had established its identity. Campy sci-fi action, Earth defense missions, flashy costumes, fun energy. Then Season 2 arrives, and the entire show basically transforms into something else. Suddenly, different tone, different structure, different atmosphere, different mission format. They move into deep space exploration aboard the Searcher. Major characters disappear, the vibe changes completely, and honestly, this is where franchises often destroy themselves. Studios start thinking, we need to reinvent this. No, darker. No, more serious. No, more intellectual. No, less camp. and suddenly you lose the exact thing audiences liked in the first place. That happens constantly, even today. Now here's the part where the story becomes peak Hollywood nonsense. In 2021, Legendary Entertainment announced a massive Buck Rogers revival project. And not just a simple reboot, no, they wanted a prestige television series, feature films, anime spin-offs, an entire sci-fi universe, and attached to this thing, George Clooney, with writer Brian K. Vaughan involved, and honestly, that actually sounded promising, because the core concept still works. A man waking up hundreds of years in the future. That's timeless science fiction material. But then the lawyers entered the chat, and everything exploded. This situation is genuinely insane. The original 1928 Buck Rogers novella entered public domain territory because the copyright renewal expired, but the actual name Buck Rogers and later comic strip elements became a legal nightmare. So suddenly you had Legendary claiming they had rights, the Nolan estate threatening lawsuits, Skydance claiming ownership interests, multiple studios preparing for war. Imagine spending millions developing a sci-fi franchise, only to discover another corporation might sue the entire production into oblivion. And here's the really frustrating part. The project didn't die because audiences rejected it, scripts were terrible, production failed. It died because corporate legal warfare made the whole thing radioactive. That's modern Hollywood. Sometimes the biggest villains aren't aliens, they're intellectual property lawyers. What fascinates me about Buck Rogers is this strange contrast. On one hand, the original show is gloriously campy nonsense, absolutely ridiculous at times, but it also had optimism, identity, sincerity, memorable visuals, iconic characters. Meanwhile, modern Hollywood spent years trying to turn everything into giant interconnected corporate cinematic universes, and couldn't even get Buck Rogers off the launch pad. There's something weirdly poetic about that. The old chaotic disco sci-fi show survived in people's memories for decades. The expensive prestige reboot collapsed immediately. Rewatching Buck Rogers now is honestly fascinating. Some of it absolutely holds up, some of it absolutely does not. But it has charm, and I think charm matters more than modern Hollywood realises, because audiences forgive rough edges when something has personality, and Buck Rogers definitely had personality, even when it looked like somebody turned a nightclub into a spaceship. But I want to know what you think. Did you watch Buck Rogers in the 25th century back in the day? Did you understand what was happening? Or were you just there for the lasers like I was? Would you actually have wanted to see George Clooney star in a modern Buck Rogers reboot? And do you think modern sci-fi has lost some of the charm these older shows had? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoy breaking down classic TV, strange Hollywood decisions, and watching corporate nonsense unfold in real time, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because there is always more nonsense waiting around the corner. And honestly, Hollywood never disappoints in that department.